Imagine a world shrouded in silence, where the very concept of widespread knowledge was an unimaginable dream. A world before the printed word, where centuries crawled by in an intellectual twilight. Books, painstakingly copied by flickering candlelight within monastic scriptoriums, were sacred treasures, rare, expensive, and often guarded behind the walls of power. Access to information was a luxury, a privilege reserved for an elite few: kings, clergy, and scholars. For the vast majority, the universe of ideas remained a closed book, their lives dictated by tradition, superstition, and the whispers of authority. Then, a flicker, a spark ignited in the mid-15th century with Johannes Gutenberg's revolutionary invention. But the story doesn't end with a single inventor. It truly begins with the countless hands that brought his creation to life, the unsung army of printing press operators. These skilled craftsmen, toiling in workshops across Europe, were more than just laborers. With every piece of type they set, every sheet they inked, every impression they pulled, they were unknowingly chiseling away at the bedrock of the old world. This documentary, The Unsung Revolution, journeys deep into the heart of this transformative era. We will uncover how these dedicated men, often overlooked by history, became the accidental architects of the information age. From the quiet clatter of the press to the roar of public discourse, we'll explore how their tireless work dismantled existing hierarchies, fueled scientific breakthroughs, and ultimately ignited a silent revolution that reshaped society, governance, and human understanding forever. Prepare to witness how the simple act of printing became the most powerful force for change the world had ever seen. Imagine a world where knowledge itself was a treasure more precious than gold, guarded zealously within stone walls. Before the dawn of mechanical print, every single book was a monument to human endurance. In the hushed, sun-dappled scriptoria of medieval monasteries, devoted scribes toiled for years, their lives consumed by the meticulous act of transcription. Quill pens scratched rhythmically across sheets of painstakingly prepared parchment or vellum, often the treated skins of dozens of animals, each stroke a testament to unwavering patience. A single copy of the Bible, for instance, could demand an entire year, sometimes even more, from a team of dedicated monks. Its creation involved not just copying text, but the elaborate artistry of illumination, intricate borders, vibrant miniatures, and gilded initials that transformed pages into breathtaking works of art. This wasn't merely a task. It was an act of profound devotion, ensuring the preservation of religious texts, classical philosophy, and ancient wisdom. But this devotion came at an astronomical cost. The materials alone were exorbitant, the labor immense, rendering books a luxury beyond the reach of ordinary people. Knowledge became the exclusive domain of the elite: kings, nobles, wealthy merchants, and the highest echelons of the church. A monarch's library, boasting perhaps a few hundred volumes, represented a national treasure, a curated collection of wisdom accessible only to a privileged few. For the vast majority of humanity, the written word was an abstract concept, a distant echo from the halls of power and piety. This monumental bottleneck in information dissemination wasn't just a challenge. It was an impenetrable barrier, holding back the tides of progress and collective understanding. The world yearned for a different way, a way to unlock the knowledge confined within these sacred, silent walls. In a world where written knowledge was a guarded secret, the currents of information flowed through different, far more ephemeral channels. Before the printing press, most human experience was an oral tradition, a vibrant, often communal tapestry woven from spoken words. News traveled on the wind, carried by merchants and travelers along muddy trade routes, its truth often morphing with each. Retelling. Information was a whisper in the marketplace, a shouted declaration from a town square, or the solemn pronouncements of a royal herald. Town criers, with their distinctive bells and booming voices, were the original news anchors, relaying edict from distant lords, announcing local events, or sharing warnings of disease. But their reach was limited, their words transient, fading into the clamor of daily life as soon as they were uttered. Stories, ballads, and historical accounts were memorized and passed down through generations, making the human mind the primary archive. This rich oral culture was essential, binding communities together, preserving heritage, and transmitting practical knowledge. But it was inherently fragile, susceptible to misinterpretation, loss, and deliberate alteration. There was no authoritative record, no widely distributed text to verify facts or challenge narratives. Contrast this with the potential for widespread distortion or the sheer impossibility of sharing complex scientific theories or philosophical treatises effectively. How could a new discovery in astronomy reach scholars across continents when the medium was a human voice, prone to fatigue and error? How could a revolutionary idea challenge entrenched power structures if it couldn't be codified, replicated, and distributed en masse? The limitations were profound, creating pockets of localized understanding, preventing the rapid cross-pollination of ideas that fuels innovation. This was a world of constrained horizons, awaiting a seismic shift that would amplify those whispers into a chorus and eventually a roar. Against this backdrop of limited knowledge and slow transmission, a visionary began to dream of a revolution. In the mid-15th century, a man named Johannes Gutenberg, a skilled goldsmith from Mainz, Germany, embarked on a quest that would change the course of human history. His was not a grand public declaration, but a secret, meticulously planned endeavor, shrouded in the discreet workshops of a craftsman. Gutenberg understood the immense bottleneck created by manual transcription. He saw a world hungry for knowledge, yet starved by its scarcity. His vision was audacious: to mechanize the creation of books, to transform a painstaking artisanal process into an efficient, repeatable industry. Coming from a lineage of goldsmiths, Gutenberg possessed an intimate understanding of metallurgy, precision engineering, and the creation of intricate molds, skills that would prove crucial. He wasn't simply inventing a machine. He was conceptualizing an entire system. The challenges were monumental. How to create individual, uniform letters that could be rearranged infinitely? How to craft an ink that would adhere to metal type and transfer cleanly to paper? And, most critically, how to devise a press capable of exerting immense, even pressure across an entire page, hundreds of times an hour, working in utmost secrecy, often borrowing heavily and facing immense financial pressure. Gutenberg experimented tirelessly. His workshop was a crucible of innovation, a place where age-old craft met nascent mechanical genius. He risked everything: his reputation, his fortune, his very freedom, driven by the conviction that knowledge should not be confined. He was not just an inventor. He was an architect of the future, laying the groundwork for an information age that no one could yet fathom. His genius lay not in inventing a single component, but in ingeniously combining existing technologies and inventing new ones, forging them into a coherent, revolutionary system that was on the cusp of unveiling. Gutenberg's genius culminated in a machine that, at first glance, might have seemed familiar. He didn't invent the press itself. He ingeniously adapted existing screw presses, commonly used for pressing grapes for wine or olives for oil. These robust wooden mechanisms provided the foundational leverage. But his true innovation lay in synthesizing a complex system around it. At the heart of his breakthrough was movable type. Drawing on his goldsmithing background, Gutenberg developed a precise method for casting individual letters from a durable metal alloy, typically lead, tin, and antimony. He first created steel punches, each with a raised letter. These punches were then struck into softer copper to create a matrix, a mold for each letter. Into these matrices, molten metal was poured, resulting in perfectly uniform, interchangeable pieces of type. This precise uniformity was critical. It ensured that every letter, no matter where it was placed, would align perfectly with its neighbors, creating legible lines of text. Equally vital was the ink. Traditional scribal inks, water-based, simply wouldn't adhere to metal type. Gutenberg developed an oil-based ink, a thick, viscous mixture of soot, turpentine, and walnut oil. This ink coated the type evenly, transferring cleanly and boldly to paper, resisting smudging and drying quickly. The final component was the paper itself, which had to be dampened to better absorb the ink and receive the impression. Once the type was set, inked, and paper laid carefully over it, the heavy platen of the modified press descended with immense force, transferring the inked image onto the page. What emerged was not just a copy, but a precise, uniform reproduction, created with a speed unimaginable to any scribe. This integrated system of movable type, specialized ink, and a perfected press marked the true unveiling of the printing revolution. The magnificent machine was built, but it was merely an inert marvel without the human touch. With Gutenberg's invention, a wholly new and specialized trade was born, the printing press operator. These were the unsung artisans who would truly unleash the information age. Becoming a master printer was not a casual endeavor. It was a rigorous, demanding apprenticeship, often lasting 7 years, akin to mastering any high-status craft of the era. Apprentices, often starting as young boys, began at the very bottom, sweeping floors and fetching water. Slowly, they would be initiated into the arcane mysteries of the print shop. They learned to prepare animal hides for parchment, and later, to cut and dampen paper. They were taught the intricate dance of sorting and distributing hundreds of thousands of individual pieces of type, recognizing each tiny character by touch and sight. The precise art of composition came next, setting type letter by letter into a composing stick, then arranging lines into galleys, and finally locking them into the heavy metal fermi that would go onto the press. This demanded not just manual dexterity, but an impeccable eye for detail, an understanding of Latin and often Greek, and an almost superhuman patience. Operating the press itself was a physically grueling task. It required immense strength to turn the heavy screw, pressing the paper against the ink type with consistent force. They learned the delicate balance of ink application, ensuring even coverage without over-inking or smudging. They were expected to maintain the temperamental machine, troubleshooting minor mechanical issues, cleaning the type, and mixing the precise recipe for the oil-based ink. These were not mere machine tenders. They were scholar craftsmen, blending traditional artisanal skills with an entirely new mechanical literacy. They were the crucial link between Gutenberg's vision and the mass production of knowledge, their calloused hands becoming the true engines of the revolution. Step inside an early printing shop of the 15th century, and you'd be assaulted by a symphony of industry. Far from the monastic silence of the scriptorium, these workshops were bustling, chaotic, yet remarkably organized hubs of human activity, a microcosm of the nascent industrial age. The air would be thick with the scent of oil-based ink, damp paper, and human sweat. The rhythmic creak and thud of the press formed the relentless heartbeat of the operation, punctuated by the clatter of metal type, the rustle of paper, and the shouted commands of the master printer. Every square foot of the workshop had a purpose. Cases of sorted type lined the walls, hundreds of thousands of individual characters waiting to be composed. Nearby, the compositor painstakingly selected each letter, placing them into a composing stick, building words, lines, and paragraphs backward and upside down, a task demanding incredible focus and spatial reasoning. Once a page, or fermi, was assembled and locked tight, it moved to the press itself, where the pressman and his assistant would take over. One would ink the type with leather ink balls. The other would carefully lay the dampened paper, then pull the heavy lever, bringing the platen down with a resounding thud. Each impression, a precious step toward a finished book. Amidst this orchestrated chaos, other tasks unfolded. Apprentices cutting and stacking reams of paper, correctors proofreading freshly printed sheets against the manuscript, their sharp eyes scanning for any deviation. Printed sheets would be hung to dry on ropes stretched across the ceiling, creating a bizarre canopy of emerging literature. The early print shop was a forge of ideas, a place where collaboration was not just helpful, but essential. It was a factory of knowledge, requiring seamless teamwork, precision, and an unyielding pace to transform raw materials into the very fabric of the future. The romantic notion of invention often overshadows the brutal reality of its implementation. For the early printing press operators, the daily grind was anything but glamorous. This was arduous, repetitive labor, demanding physical endurance and mental fortitude from dawn until dusk. Their day began long before sunrise, often by candlelight, preparing the materials for the day's work. The paper, critical for a good impression, had to be carefully dampened. Too dry and it wouldn't take the ink, too wet and it would tear. The oil-based ink, a messy, greasy substance, required constant mixing and replenishment. The type itself needed meticulous cleaning after each run, a painstaking task to prevent blockages and maintain legibility. Operating the press was a relentless physical workout. The puller would turn the heavy screw arm of the press, sometimes hundreds or even thousands of times a day, requiring significant upper body strength. The beater would skillfully apply the ink using two heavy leather balls, ensuring even coverage without smudging. The heat generated by human effort, combined with poor ventilation, made for uncomfortable, often suffocating conditions. Errors were costly. A misaligned page, a smudged impression, or an uncorrected typo meant wasted paper, wasted time, and potential damage to the print run's reputation. Yet, driven by the nascent demands of a market hungry for books, these operators pushed themselves to maximize output. A skilled team could produce hundreds of impressions per hour, a rate that would have seemed miraculous just decades prior. Their hands were stained with ink, their clothes smudged, their bodies aching, but they were the crucial human engines, powering an unprecedented acceleration of knowledge. Every turn of the screw, every inked sheet, was a deliberate act, slowly but surely dismantling the old world's barriers to information, one painstakingly printed page at a time. To view early printing press operators as mere machine tenders would be a profound oversight. Far from being simple laborers, these men were essential conduits of knowledge, standing at the very forefront of the burgeoning information age. Their role extended far beyond the mechanical operation of the press. They were often the first to read, proofread, and correct text that would soon reach thousands. Imagine their unique position, holding a manuscript, often a rare and fragile relic, and meticulously setting its words into metal type. This intimate engagement with the text required not just literacy, but often an understanding of Latin, Greek, or other classical languages, placing them intellectually on par with many scholars of the time. Operators frequently served as de facto editors and correctors. Manuscripts arriving at the print shop were rarely perfect, filled with scribal errors accumulated over centuries of copying. It fell to the skilled compositor and the meticulous corrector, often the most experienced printers, to identify and rectify these mistakes. They didn't just reproduce, they refined, standardized, and in doing so, unknowingly contributed to the evolution of language itself. They were responsible for ensuring the accuracy and integrity of the information that would soon disseminate across continents, shaping public opinion, scientific discovery, and religious thought. Their decisions on spacing, punctuation, and even subtle word choices, made in the frantic pace of the print shop, had a lasting impact. They were the crucial human filter, the unseen gatekeepers who determined what was published, how it appeared, and ultimately, how it would be received. Without their dedication, their intellectual engagement, and their relentless physical effort, Gutenberg's revolutionary invention would have remained a mere curiosity. It was the printing press operators, the unsung human engines of the machine, who truly unleashed the torrent of information, forever reshaping the intellectual landscape of the world and laying the groundwork for every byte of data we consume today. From the monastic scriptorium, where illuminated manuscripts were painstakingly crafted by hand, a revolution was brewing. Johannes Gutenberg's invention in the mid-15th century wasn't merely a mechanical marvel. It was a spiritual catalyst. One of the printing press's earliest, and perhaps most profound, impacts was on religious texts, particularly the Christian Bible. Before the press, Bibles were rare, costly, and often contained variations and errors introduced by centuries of manual transcription. A single copy could take a scribe years to complete, making it a luxury accessible only to the clergy and the wealthiest elites. Then came the Gutenberg Bible, a magnificent two-volume Latin text printed between 1450 and 1455. It wasn't just a book, it was a statement. The sheer uniformity and clarity of its 42 lines per page were astounding. For the first time, multiple identical copies of Scripture existed, not merely within a decade, but within months. This was the dawn of standardization. Printers, responding to an insatiable spiritual hunger, rapidly produced more Bibles, not just in Latin, but increasingly in vernacular languages across Europe. This act, driven by the practicalities of a burgeoning industry, inadvertently laid the groundwork for one of history's greatest upheavals, the Protestant Reformation. When Martin Luther nailed his 95 Theses to the church door in Wittenberg in 1517, challenging established dogma, his ideas didn't remain confined to a single town. Printed pamphlets and copies of his own German translation of the New Testament flooded the market, carried by the very hands of the printing press operators. Suddenly, Scripture was not just for priests. It was for the common man and woman to read and interpret for themselves. This democratization of the Holy Word shattered the Church's monopoly on interpretation and belief, empowering individuals and giving rise to new religious movements. The printing press, initially a tool for efficiency, became an unwitting agent of spiritual emancipation, irrevocably altering the religious landscape of Europe and beyond. The widespread dissemination of the Bible, as we've seen, ignited a profound shift in society, planting the seeds of individual interpretation. But its impact rippled far beyond theology. For centuries, an oral tradition had dominated European culture, knowledge passed down through stories, sermons, and songs. Books were rare, and thus, so was the ability to read. Yet with cheaper, more accessible religious texts now available, a new hunger began to stir, a societal thirst for knowledge itself. The printing press directly stimulated a dramatic rise in literacy rates, turning the once exclusive act of reading into an increasingly common pursuit. Imagine the impact on ordinary people. Merchants needing to track inventory and contracts, artisans wanting to learn new techniques, parents desiring to educate their children. The printing press provided the tools. Printers, ever astute to market demand, quickly moved beyond Bibles to produce a wider array of materials. Primers for learning to read, grammars, almanacs filled with practical information, and simple storybooks. These texts, often printed in affordable, smaller formats, made the dream of literacy tangible for more than just the elite. Town schools began to proliferate, and even within households, reading became a valued skill. No longer was education a luxury. It was becoming a necessity, a pathway to social and economic advancement. The demand for skilled press operators and typesetters further fueled this educational expansion, as those working directly with the printed word often found themselves on the forefront of intellectual inquiry. This explosion of accessible written material didn't just teach people how to read. It fundamentally reshaped how they thought. It fostered critical thinking, encouraged debate, and broke down the barriers of isolated communities. A humble shopkeeper in London could now access the same information, albeit perhaps in a different form, as a scholar in Bologna. This was more than just learning to decode letters. It was the dawning of an age where self-education became possible, where knowledge was no longer solely dictated by authority, but explored by the curious individual. The hands that set the type were not just producing pages. They were laying the foundation for a truly informed populace. As literacy rates climbed, driven by the availability of affordable printed materials, the question of language became paramount. For centuries, Latin had been the lingua franca of scholars, the church, and international diplomacy across Europe. It was the language of power and learning, but it was largely incomprehensible to the vast majority of the population. The printing press, however, began to dismantle Latin's unchallenged dominance, sparking a cultural revolution that would ultimately forge the very concept of national identity. Printers, driven by the desire to reach the broadest possible market, recognized the immense demand for text in the everyday languages of the people, the vernaculars. Operators like William Caxton, who established England's first printing press in 1476, made conscious decisions to print works in English rather than solely Latin. They printed Chaucer's Canterbury Tales and Malory's Le Morte d'Arthur, popularizing and standardizing the language. Across the continent, presses hummed with productions in German, French, Italian, and Spanish. Martin Luther's German translation of the Bible, produced in astonishing numbers, not only reshaped religious belief, but also dramatically influenced the German language itself, establishing a common idiom that unified disparate regional dialects. This shift was profoundly transformative. By consistently printing in local languages, press operators inadvertently played a crucial role in standardizing grammar, spelling, and vocabulary. Before the press, regional dialects could vary wildly, making communication difficult even within a relatively small geographic area. Now, for the first time, millions could read the same words, structured in the same way. This shared linguistic experience fostered a powerful sense of collective identity, creating a common cultural ground that transcended local allegiances. People began to see themselves not just as villagers of a specific region, but as speakers of English or French or German. The printed word provided the invisible sinews that began to bind fragmented populations into unified nations, laying the groundwork for the modern nation-state. The operators, turning their presses, were quite literally shaping the cultural and political map of Europe. The transition from Latin to vernacular, alongside the surge in literacy, would have been impossible without a fundamental economic shift brought about by the printing press: the dramatic reduction in the cost of books. In the pre-Gutenberg era, a single hand-copied manuscript could represent years of a scribe's labor and fetch a price equivalent to a house, or even a small farm. These were luxury items, possessed by monarchs, wealthy monasteries, and the highest echelons of the nobility. Knowledge, by its very nature, was exclusive. Then came the press, a machine capable of producing hundreds, even thousands of identical copies in the time it once took to create one. The impact on cost was staggering. Historians estimate that within a century of its invention, the price of books plummeted by over 80%, and in some cases, even more dramatically. A book that once cost a gold coin might now be available for a silver shilling. This wasn't merely a price adjustment. It was an economic revolution that reshaped accessibility. Suddenly, the printed word was within reach of merchants, artisans, and even some prosperous peasants. Books transformed from being symbols of elite status into practical tools for learning, commerce, and entertainment. Libraries, once the exclusive domain of institutions, began to appear in private homes. The burgeoning middle class, eager for education and self-improvement, became a massive new market for printers. This affordability fueled the demand for even more diverse texts, from technical manuals and legal codes to plays and poetry. The print shop became the engine of a new economy, where information, once hoarded, was now a commodity to be bought and sold. This unprecedented affordability fundamentally democratized knowledge. It empowered individuals, enabling them to bypass traditional gatekeepers of information. The printing press operators, by optimizing their production, were not just running machines. They were dismantling economic barriers to knowledge, turning what was once a rare treasure into an everyday instrument of progress and enlightenment. Their tireless work unleashed a torrent of information, making the dream of an informed society a tangible reality. With the cost of books plummeting and literacy on the rise, the intellectual landscape of Europe was primed for an explosion of new ideas. This fertile ground proved indispensable for the monumental shift we now call the scientific revolution. For centuries, scientific knowledge had been fragmented, prone to transcription errors, and slow to disseminate. A new astronomical observation or a medical discovery might take decades, even centuries, to travel across continents, often being misinterpreted or lost along the way. The printing press changed everything. Now, scientists like Nicholas Copernicus could publish their groundbreaking theories, such as the heliocentric model of the universe in De Revolutionibus Orbium Coelestium in 1543, and have their ideas accurately replicated and distributed across Europe within months. Galileo Galilei's observations through his telescope, meticulously illustrated, could be shared with fellow astronomers, fostering collaboration and debate on an unprecedented scale. Isaac Newton's Principia Mathematica, published in 1687, laid the foundation for classical mechanics and was rapidly disseminated to a global scientific community, allowing his peers to build upon his work almost immediately. The accuracy of printed diagrams, charts, and mathematical equations was crucial. No longer reliant on the variable skill of a copyist, complex illustrations, from anatomical drawings to astronomical maps, could be reproduced with perfect fidelity hundreds of times over. This consistency eliminated ambiguity, allowing scientists to verify results, challenge existing theories, and replicate experiments with greater confidence. The printing press facilitated the creation of a truly interconnected scientific community, accelerating the pace of discovery beyond anything previously imagined. Scientific societies formed, their journals filled with peer-reviewed articles, all made possible by the efficiency of print. It wasn't just about sharing knowledge, it was about building upon it. Each new printed text became a stepping stone for the next, propelling humanity forward at a dizzying speed. The hands that operated these machines were, in essence, the conduits through which the very fabric of human understanding of the natural world was being woven and spread, ushering in an era of unprecedented intellectual advancement. The seismic shift in scientific thought propagated by the printing press had profound and tangible consequences for human health. For over a millennium, medical understanding in Europe had largely been confined to the teachings of ancient Greek physician Galen, often misinterpreted or augmented by conjecture and superstition. Dissections were rare, and anatomical knowledge was passed down through limited, often inaccurate, hand-copied texts. The consequences for patients were dire. But then, the press brought about a revolution in medicine. Central to this transformation was Andreas Vesalius, a brilliant anatomist whose seminal work, De Humani Corporis Fabrica, on the fabric of the human body, published in 1543, forever changed medical practice. Vesalius, crucially, insisted on performing his own dissections and meticulously documenting his observations. The real power of his work, however, lay in its dissemination through print. This wasn't just a book, it was an anatomical atlas, featuring an unprecedented level of detail in its woodcut illustrations. These weren't crude sketches. They were remarkably accurate, three-dimensional renderings of the human musculature and skeletal system, depicted with artistic mastery. For the first time, medical students and practitioners across Europe could study the human body from identical, authoritative sources. These accurately reproduced anatomical atlases replaced centuries of conjecture and dogma with verifiable, visual evidence. Doctors could now base their diagnoses and surgical procedures on a standardized, empirical understanding of human anatomy, rather than relying on flawed ancient texts. The widespread availability of such detailed medical textbooks revolutionized surgical training, reduced errors, and directly contributed to saving countless lives. Public health initiatives, from understanding disease transmission to promoting sanitation, could also be communicated more effectively through printed pamphlets and guides. The hands of the printers, carefully aligning each woodcut block and pressing the paper, were not just producing pages, they were literally advancing the frontiers of healing. They transformed medicine from an art of blind faith and inherited wisdom into a science grounded in observation and verifiable knowledge, a legacy that continues to impact healthcare to this very day. As the printing press reshaped the inner world of science and medicine, it simultaneously expanded humanity's understanding of the outer world. The Age of Exploration, beginning in the late 15th century, was a period of unprecedented voyages and discoveries, driven by a thirst for new trade routes, resources, and knowledge. And in this grand endeavor, the printing press proved to be an indispensable companion, charting the course to new worlds and fundamentally reshaping our global worldview. Before print, maps were rare, expensive, and often inconsistent, copied by hand with varying degrees of accuracy. Information about distant lands was fragmented, based on rumor, travelers' tales, and ancient texts. The printing press revolutionized cartography. Printers could now produce accurate, standardized maps in large quantities, making them accessible to navigators, merchants, and explorers. The works of cartographers like Gerard Mercator, with his groundbreaking projection that allowed for accurate navigation, could be distributed widely, providing mariners with reliable tools to cross vast oceans. Beyond maps, the press facilitated the rapid sharing of travelogues, detailed accounts of expeditions, and descriptions of newly encountered peoples, flora, and fauna. Christopher Columbus's letters detailing his discoveries were quickly printed and disseminated across Europe, fueling further curiosity and ambition. Later, accounts from Ferdinand Magellan's circumnavigation of the globe or Vasco da Gama's journey to India offered detailed insights that spurred further exploration and investment. These printed narratives, often accompanied by vivid illustrations, ignited the public imagination, transforming abstract geographical concepts into tangible realities. They spurred investment in new voyages, documented trade routes, and even helped colonizers understand and exploit new territories. Printing press operators, carefully inking and pressing large, intricate map blocks, were quite literally redrawing the world. They enabled a collective understanding of our planet's geography, transforming isolated knowledge into shared awareness. Their work didn't just document discovery. It fueled it, transforming individual feats of courage into a collective human endeavor, ushering in an era of global interconnectedness that continues to define our modern world. As maps expanded our understanding of distant lands, the printing press also brought the world closer to home, delivering immediate information and shaping public opinion. Beyond weighty tomes and detailed atlases, the press enabled the rapid production of shorter, more ephemeral pieces, broadsides, and pamphlets. This was the true genesis of mass media, a revolution in timely communication that fundamentally altered how societies received and reacted to current events. Before print, news traveled by word of mouth, town criers, or handwritten letters that took weeks or months to arrive. Accuracy was questionable and dissemination limited. But with the printing press, printers could swiftly respond to unfolding events. A broadside, a single sheet of paper printed on one side, could be produced by the hundreds or thousands in a day. These were pasted on walls, distributed in markets, and read aloud in public squares, disseminating news of royal decrees, local festivals, sensational crimes, or declarations of war. Pamphlets, slightly longer unbound booklets, offered space for more detailed reports, political arguments, and religious debates. During the Protestant Reformation, pamphlets became a potent weapon, carrying Luther's ideas and counterarguments across Europe like wildfire. Later, during the English Civil War in the 17th century, both royalists and parliamentarians flooded the streets with pamphlets, shaping public opinion and mobilizing support for their respective causes. This rapid-fire exchange of ideas and information fostered a new level of civic engagement and public discourse. Suddenly, ordinary citizens had access to immediate, albeit often biased, accounts of the world around them. This unprecedented flow of timely information was a double-edged sword. It could inform and enlighten, but also spread misinformation and propaganda with terrifying efficiency. The printing press operators, often working through the night to meet deadlines, were not merely mechanics. They were the unsung gatekeepers of public information, inadvertently wielding immense power. They were the first news producers, laying the groundwork for everything from modern newspapers to digital media. Their hands, ink-stained and tireless, gave birth to the very concept of news, forever changing how societies would consume and react to the unfolding drama of human events. In the nascent dawn of the printing age, not every turn of the press was sanctioned. Beyond the bustling workshops churning out Bibles and official decrees lay a hidden world, a dangerous labyrinth where light met shadow, the underground press. Here, the true agents of intellectual rebellion operated, not for profit, but for principle, risking everything to defy the iron grip of power. Imagine a clandestine room, tucked away in the heart of a bustling city, or deep within the quiet anonymity of the countryside. By the flickering, meager light of tallow candles, the rhythmic thud of a printing press would echo, a muffled heartbeat of defiance. These operators were not mere craftsmen. They were revolutionaries, their hands stained not just with ink, but with the courage of conviction. They printed what was forbidden, texts that dared to question the divine right of kings, the infallibility of the church, or the entrenched social hierarchies. Heretical tracts, philosophical treatises challenging dogma, satirical pamphlets mocking the powerful. These were the weapons they forged in ink and paper. From the fiery polemics of early Protestant reformers railing against Catholic authority to the subversive whispers of Enlightenment thinkers like Voltaire and Rousseau, whose ideas simmered beneath the surface of absolute monarchies, the underground press was the conduit. Operators like the Dutch printer Dirk Coornhert, who championed religious tolerance in an age of brutal intolerance, or the network of French printers who smuggled copies of Diderot's Encyclopédie past royal censors, faced brutal consequences. Discovery meant imprisonment, torture, or even execution. Their workshops were raided, their equipment smashed, their lives irrevocably shattered. Yet, the demand for truth, for alternative narratives, for the intoxicating taste of forbidden knowledge, proved insatiable. These unsung heroes developed intricate networks for distribution, their precious cargo often disguised as legal merchandise, smuggled across borders in false-bottomed carts, or passed hand-to-hand in the dead of night. Each copy of a banned book that found its way into a reader's hand was a small victory, a seed of rebellion planted. The very act of printing these forbidden texts was a powerful declaration that ideas, once put to paper, could not be unwritten, and that the truth, however inconvenient, would always find a way to surface. The underground press was not just printing. It was an act of profound intellectual insurgency, a testament to the enduring human desire for freedom of thought, setting the stage for even grander acts of defiance. The seeds of dissent sown by the underground press ripened into full-blown social and political movements, and at their very heart stood the printing press operators. They were far more than mechanical reproducers. Many were ideologically aligned, passionate advocates for the causes they served. The rhythmic thud of their presses became the very heartbeat of revolution, transforming abstract grievances into tangible calls to action. Consider the Reformation in the 16th century. Martin Luther's 95 Theses, once pinned to a church door, exploded into Europe-wide debate thanks to the printers who tirelessly reproduced his challenges to papal authority. They printed not just theological arguments, but biting caricatures and vernacular pamphlets that energized the common people, turning a scholarly dispute into a popular uprising. Luther himself understood this power, writing, "The printing press is the last and greatest gift of God. Through it he will spread the truth." Centuries later, the American Revolution found its voice through the diligent hands of operators like Benjamin Franklin, a printer by trade, whose presses churned out newspapers and pamphlets that rallied patriots and exposed British injustices. Thomas Paine's Common Sense, a potent argument for independence, became an instant bestseller, its words echoing in taverns, homes, and military camps, galvanizing a nascent nation. Across the Atlantic, on the eve of the French Revolution, the Parisian printing presses worked overtime, producing torrents of manifestos, revolutionary newspapers, and satirical broadsides. Operators, often working in defiance of royal censors, distributed these incendiary materials, feeding the insatiable hunger for news and shaping public opinion against the ancien regime. They printed the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen, ensuring its powerful message resonated beyond the halls of power. These printers understood the profound impact of their work. They were the scribes of rebellion, wielding ink and paper as instruments of change. They transcribed speeches, published manifestos, and crafted the very language of liberation. Their presses did not merely reproduce. They amplified, they agitated, they mobilized. They took the scattered embers of discontent and fanned them into the roaring inferno of social and political upheaval, cementing their pivotal role as architects of a new world. While monumental books laid the foundation for knowledge, it was the humble pamphlet that became the true viral media of its era. Agile, affordable, and incredibly potent, pamphlets outmaneuvered the slower, more expensive book trade, becoming the immediate pulse of public discourse. Imagine a world hungry for information, where news traveled at the speed of horse and carriage, and formal books took months, even years, to produce. Into this landscape burst the pamphlet, a slim, unbound booklet, typically just a few pages, inexpensive to print and quick to distribute. It was the perfect vehicle for immediacy, a rapid response mechanism to breaking events. Printers could produce thousands of copies of a pamphlet in a single day, compared to the weeks or months required for a bound volume. This speed allowed them to capitalize on current events, offering commentary, news, or arguments almost as they unfolded. During the English Civil War in the mid-17th century, pamphlets became the primary battleground of ideas, with royalists and parliamentarians deluging the public with their viewpoints. Authors, often anonymous, could quickly publish scathing critiques of government policy, religious doctrine, or social injustice, disseminating them widely before authorities could even react. These short, sharp literary attacks and defenses circulated through coffee houses, taverns, and marketplaces, fueling intense debates and shaping nascent public opinion. Perhaps no pamphlet exemplifies this power more profoundly than Thomas Paine's Common Sense, published in 1776. Written in plain, accessible language, it articulated a clear, compelling case for American independence. Its rapid production and widespread distribution, an estimated 100,000 to 120,000 copies sold in just 3 months to a population of 2.5 million, ignited revolutionary fervor and shifted the tide of public sentiment decisively towards independence. The pamphlet was a democratizing force, making complex ideas accessible to the masses and transforming abstract philosophical debates into practical calls to action. It was the ultimate weapon in the war of ideas. Quick, cheap, and undeniably potent, proving that sometimes the most profound changes begin with a few folded sheets of paper. The revolution sparked by the printing press wasn't confined to the creation of texts. It was equally profound in their dissemination. What good were thousands of pamphlets if they languished in a printer's workshop? The true genius lay in getting them into the hands of the people. This Herculean task often fell to the printers themselves, who evolved beyond mere craftsmen to become astute merchants and logistical masterminds, forging complex circulation networks that spanned cities, nations, and continents. In the early days, printers would often operate their own small storefronts, selling their wares directly to customers. But as demand surged and the volume of printed material exploded, more sophisticated systems were needed. Printers established relationships with a burgeoning class of booksellers, who became vital nodes in the distribution web. These booksellers, often traveling long distances, brought printed materials to remote towns and villages. Beyond the formal shops, a bustling network of peddlers, hawkers, and chapmen emerged. These itinerant vendors, with their packs laden with chapbooks, broadsides, and pamphlets, traversed the countryside, bringing news, stories, and ideas to those beyond urban centers. They were the original last-mile delivery agents, ensuring that even the most isolated communities were touched by the information revolution. International trade routes, once solely for spices and silks, now carried a new, far more volatile commodity: ideas. Printed materials were smuggled across borders, concealed in barrels, hidden in diplomatic pouches, or simply openly traded in bustling port cities like Amsterdam and London, which became centers for the international book trade. Printers often formed alliances with colleagues in other cities or countries, exchanging stock, collaborating on editions, and creating a truly global intellectual marketplace. This intricate web of production and distribution, driven largely by the entrepreneurial spirit and daring of the printers themselves, ensured that the words printed on their presses transcended geographical boundaries, planting the seeds of change wherever they landed. They were not just manufacturers. They were the architects of a brave new world's information highway. The seismic shift initiated by the printing press didn't merely multiply books. It birthed an entirely new ecosystem of professions, fundamentally altering the landscape of commerce and power. From the humble artisan printer emerged a sophisticated network of specialists, transforming the very act of putting ink to paper into a complex industry. At the forefront of this evolution was the rise of the publisher. Initially, the printer was often also the publisher, taking on the financial risk of selecting, producing, and selling texts. But as the market expanded and competition intensified, a clear distinction began to emerge. Publishers became the intellectual entrepreneurs, the curators of culture. They were the ones who identified authors, commissioned works, secured funding, and managed the entire production process, from editing and typesetting to printing and distribution. Figures like Aldus Manutius in Venice, who pioneered affordable pocket editions of classics in the late 15th century, or the Estienne family in France, renowned for their scholarly works, transformed printing into a respected, influential enterprise. Their decisions shaped the intellectual currents of their age, determining which ideas would reach the widest audience and which would fade into obscurity. They negotiated with authors, sometimes offering advances, and slowly, the concept of intellectual property and royalties began to take shape. Beyond the publishers, a myriad of other vital roles crystallized. Booksellers evolved from simple vendors into knowledgeable purveyors of literature, often hosting intellectual discussions in their shops and serving as community hubs. Librarians, once caretakers of precious manuscripts, became custodians of vast, ever-growing collections of printed works, developing new systems for cataloging and access. Engravers, proofreaders, binders, and compositors. Each specialized role contributed to a burgeoning industry that not only produced information, but also managed its flow. This new class of professionals wielded immense power, not through military might or inherited wealth, but through their control over the production and dissemination of knowledge. They were the gatekeepers and the facilitators, shaping the intellectual landscape for centuries to come, laying the groundwork for the modern media industry. As printed materials proliferated, escaping the confines of monasteries and courts, they shattered the monopoly on information held by the elite. For the first time, ordinary citizens gained access to diverse viewpoints, news, and critical analyses, fostering an unprecedented era of public discourse. This widespread access to information didn't just educate. It transformed the very fabric of society, paving the way for the concept of an informed citizenry and, crucially, the rise of public opinion. Imagine a tavern in 18th century London, once a place solely for drink and gossip, now buzzing with animated discussions over the latest pamphlet or newspaper. Or a Parisian salon, where philosophers and common folk alike debated the merits of new scientific discoveries or revolutionary political theories, all fueled by the printed word. These became the public spheres, spaces where ideas could be freely exchanged, challenged, and refined, independent of official decree. Previously, authority derived from divine right or inherited status. Now, authority began to shift, increasingly tied to the persuasive power of ideas disseminated through print. When citizens could read about injustices, challenge official narratives, or compared different political ideologies, they began to form collective opinions that could no longer be easily ignored. This awakening had profound consequences. It fueled the Enlightenment, giving voice to thinkers who championed reason, individual rights, and democratic governance. It was instrumental in the American and French revolutions, where popular sentiment, shaped by countless pamphlets and newspapers, became an unstoppable force. No longer were the masses simply subjects. They were readers, thinkers, and debaters, capable of forming their own judgments and demanding accountability from their rulers. The printing press had democratized knowledge, empowering individuals with the tools to critique, question, and ultimately, to shape their own destiny. This burgeoning public opinion became a powerful, often uncontrollable force, a new kind of power that kings and emperors would soon learn to fear. The immense, transformative power of the printing press quickly became a double-edged sword. While it democratized knowledge, it also unleashed a torrent of ideas that challenged established authority, provoking fear and sparking a relentless, centuries-long struggle between control and the free flow of information. Rulers, both secular and religious, recognized the potent threat posed by an informed, questioning populace. Their response was swift and brutal. Censorship. From the very early days, attempts were made to control what was printed. The Catholic Church, profoundly shaken by the Reformation's reliance on printed critiques, established the Index Librorum Prohibitorum, the Index of Forbidden Books, in 1559. This comprehensive list, updated for centuries, aimed to prevent the spread of heretical or dangerous ideas, forcing printers and readers to choose between obedience and intellectual freedom. Governments, too, instituted strict licensing laws, requiring printers to obtain official permission before publishing anything. Royal decrees stipulated that every book had to be approved by state censors, often with severe penalties for noncompliance. Printers caught producing unauthorized works faced fines, imprisonment, torture, and even the destruction of their valuable presses. Some, like Etienne Dalet in 16th century France, were burned at the stake for printing heretical works. Book burning became a terrifying public spectacle, a stark visual warning of the consequences of dissent. Piles of forbidden texts, from scientific treatises to political pamphlets, were reduced to ashes in town squares, their destruction meant to symbolize the eradication of dangerous thoughts. Yet, the very act of censorship often inadvertently highlighted the forbidden texts, creating a perverse allure and driving them further underground. The clandestine presses, as we've seen, continued their vital work, fueled by the very suppression they faced. This cat-and-mouse game between censor and printer defined an era, underscoring the enduring human desire for knowledge and the inherent difficulty of truly extinguishing an idea once it has found its way onto paper. The shadow of censorship loomed large, a constant reminder that freedom of the press would always be a hard-won battle. The information revolution, ignited by the printing press, was never confined by national borders. Ideas, once printed, possessed an unparalleled ability to transcend geographical and linguistic barriers, fostering a truly global intellectual exchange that reshaped societies across continents. Imagine scholars in Edinburgh reading the latest philosophical debates from Paris, or merchants in Venice discussing scientific discoveries made in London, all thanks to the relentless flow of printed materials. From the bustling book fairs of Frankfurt to the vibrant intellectual circles of Amsterdam, printed works circulated freely, bypassing local restrictions and enriching diverse cultures. The Enlightenment, a philosophical movement emphasizing reason and individualism, was not a phenomenon of a single nation, but a truly pan-European and later transatlantic endeavor. Thinkers like John Locke, Voltaire, and Montesquieu saw their works translated and reprinted across the continent, their ideas sparking similar intellectual ferment in different lands. Pamphlets and newspapers carried news of revolutions and reforms, inspiring distant populations to challenge their own authorities. For instance, reports of the American Revolution's success disseminated through European presses, provided crucial ideological fuel for the burgeoning French Revolution. Scientific advancements, too, benefited immensely from this cross-border flow. Discoveries in astronomy, medicine, and physics, once confined to a handful of scholars, could now be rapidly communicated, scrutinized, and built upon by a global community. The standardization of scientific texts and illustrations, made possible by printing, allowed for consistent understanding and accelerated the pace of innovation. Moreover, printed materials fostered cultural exchange, introducing different literary traditions, artistic styles, and even new languages to broader audiences. This interconnectedness, facilitated by the humble printing press and its operators, laid the groundwork for a truly globalized world. It proved that ideas, once unleashed, knew no boundaries, forever weaving a complex tapestry of shared knowledge and collective human progress across the vast expanse of the world. From the fervent workshops where operators wrestled with metal and ink, a new phenomenon emerged, a direct descendant of the early, clandestine pamphlets and broadsides, the birth of mass-produced periodical information. Imagine a time when news traveled at the speed of a horse or a sailing ship, when information was fragmented, often unreliable, and delayed by weeks or even months. The printing press, however, offered a tantalizing promise: the ability to disseminate news with unprecedented speed and regularity. It was the early 17th century, particularly in the burgeoning cities of Germany, that this promise began to materialize. In Strasbourg, a printer named Johann Carolus published Relation aller Firmen und Gedenkorigin Historien in 1605, widely regarded as the world's first newspaper. Just a few years later, in 1609, Lucas Schult in Wolfenbüttel launched a Weisse Relation oder Zeitung. These were not mere one-off announcements. They were the first iterations of timely, regular publications, appearing weekly, delivering foreign news, court gossip, and market reports to a burgeoning public. Behind every issue, every carefully laid out column of text, were the unsung printing press operators. They were the architects of this new informational landscape, meticulously setting thousands of individual lead types, inking the heavy platens, and feeding reams of paper through the clanking machinery. Their precision, speed, and endurance transformed a scattered collection of facts into a cohesive, widely consumable product. It was their sweat and skill that allowed these nascent newspapers to become the arteries through which the lifeblood of current events flowed, connecting distant towns and shaping a collective consciousness. This principle of timely, regular, mass-produced information, pioneered by these diligent hands, laid the unshakable foundation for all modern media. As the centuries progressed, newspapers became powerful engines of public opinion, catalysts for revolutions, and indispensable tools for commerce and politics. By the 18th century, the concept broadened further with the advent of magazines. Publications like Edward Cave's The Gentleman's Magazine, first printed in 1731, offered deeper analyses, specialized content, and a more leisurely read, catering to diverse intellectual curiosities. These early periodicals, whether daily news or monthly commentary, refined the art of public discourse and demonstrated an enduring truth. Information, when accessible and regular, transforms society. The very rhythm of our modern news cycles, from breaking headlines to glossy monthly features, beats to a drum set centuries ago by the diligent operators of the printing press. The rhythmic clatter of the printing press eventually gave way to the silent hum of silicon and servers, yet the essence of the revolution remained. The unsung heroes of the past, those meticulous printing press operators, laid not just the foundation for modern media, but also offered a profound blueprint for the human agency behind every technological leap. Their diligent, often anonymous labor, transforming complex machinery into a conduit for information, finds a striking parallel in the digital age. Consider the printing press operators. They didn't invent the press, but they mastered its intricacies. They understood the delicate balance of pressure, ink, and paper. Their skill lay in the precise alignment of type, the careful management of the press, and the sheer endurance required to produce thousands of copies with unwavering accuracy. Their work was, in essence, the programming of the mechanical information age, taking raw data, text, and through a complex, disciplined process, converting it into a widely distributable format. Who are these unsung heroes today? They are the programmers whose lines of code breathe life into our digital world, the network administrators who keep the global arteries of the internet flowing, the data scientists who make sense of vast oceans of information, and the digital content creators who craft the stories and experiences we consume daily. Like their predecessors, they often work behind the scenes, their expertise invisible to the average user, yet utterly indispensable. Their typesetting involves intricate algorithms, their inking is the seamless flow of data packets, and their press is the sprawling, interconnected network that defines our modern existence. Both sets of professionals share a common thread, an unwavering attention to detail, a deep understanding of complex systems, and an ability to troubleshoot and adapt to rapidly evolving technologies. The bugs in their code are no less critical than a misaligned block of type. Both can distort or halt the flow of information. The relentless pursuit of efficiency and accuracy, the commitment to making information accessible and reliable. These are the shared values that bridge centuries. From the ink-stained fingers of a 17th century journeyman to the nimble fingers of a 21st century coder, the story remains the same. Technological revolutions are not merely about the machines themselves, but about the skilled human hands and minds that bring them to life, empowering humanity with unprecedented access to knowledge. It is a recurring narrative of human ingenuity, diligence, and the enduring power of those who make the complex simple and the distant immediate. The journey from a world of whispered secrets and hand-copied texts to a global tapestry of instant information has been nothing short of transformative. This monumental shift, ignited by the printing press and tirelessly fueled by its operators, established an enduring legacy that reverberates profoundly today. The understanding that access to information is not a luxury, but a fundamental societal value, indeed, a human right. For centuries, knowledge was confined to the privileged few, a tool of power hoarded by kings and clergy. The printing press shattered these ancient walls, democratizing information and placing it, quite literally, into the hands of the people. This newfound access sparked the Enlightenment, fueled scientific discovery, ignited political revolutions, and empowered individuals to question, to learn, and to govern themselves. The very notion of an informed citizenry, essential for any functioning democracy, owes its existence to the tireless operators who made mass communication possible. Yet, the struggle for open information, initiated by those early operators defying authority, continues fiercely today. The digital age, with its promise of universal connectivity, has paradoxically introduced new battlegrounds. We grapple with the digital divide, where billions still lack basic internet access, mirroring the pre-Gutenberg world for a significant portion of humanity. We confront an unprecedented deluge of misinformation and disinformation, challenging our ability to discern truth amidst the noise, a problem unimaginable in the slower, more curated information landscape of centuries past. Governments and powerful corporations continue to exert control, attempting to censor content, restrict internet access, and manipulate narratives, much like the ecclesiastical and royal powers once sought to control the press. The fight for net neutrality, for data privacy, for journalistic integrity, and for basic digital literacy are all modern manifestations of this enduring struggle. The operators of today, journalists, whistleblowers, cybersecurity experts, open source advocates, and even everyday citizens demanding transparency, stand on the shoulders of those 17th century printers. Their collective efforts ensure that the flow of knowledge remains free, accurate, and accessible, safeguarding the principles established by the printing revolution. The power of access is the power to choose, to grow, to challenge, and to participate. It is the bedrock of a free society a legacy inherited from the unsung heroes of the press, and a right we must tirelessly defend for generations to come. Our journey through the centuries has revealed a profound truth. The greatest revolutions are often forged not by grand pronouncements, but by the diligent, repetitive actions of dedicated individuals. We've witnessed how the humble printing press, a marvel of its time, was transformed into an engine of change by the tireless efforts and quiet ingenuity of its operators. From the standardization of sacred scriptures to the dissemination of radical scientific theories, from fueling the Enlightenment to igniting political upheavals across continents, these unsung craftsmen were the true, anonymous architects of a world where knowledge was no longer a guarded privilege, but an accessible possibility for all. Their legacy teaches us invaluable lessons about human agency in technological revolutions, the double-edged sword of information's power, for both empowerment and control, and the enduring, critical relevance of universal access to knowledge. The next time you pick up a tangible book, scan a newspaper headline, or scroll through the endless digital streams of our modern age, take a moment to remember those calloused hands. Remember the precise movements, the rhythmic press, the ink-stained fingers that first set the type, inked the form, and unleashed the unparalleled force of information upon the world. They remind us that revolutions aren't always started by kings, generals, or singular geniuses, but often by the skilled, dedicated, and often anonymous individuals who operate the very tools of change, quietly, consistently, irrevocably altering the course of history.